its position as it is now to be the leading, the locomotive of the world economy, and will sustain the emerging markets, which means that we will end up being in serious troubles. And for we, I refer to the Europeans and not, of course, to the Americans. So the Chinese are reluctant at the moment to help the Europeans because the Europeans do not have a program to get out of this situation. What do the Europeans have done so far? Well, basically is using debt in order to sustain additional debt. Now here I want to open a very brief technical parenthesis about why many people believe that the situation of the debt of the periphery at the moment is much better than it was in November. Why the reports coming out from the rating agencies are ignored by the market, which continues to be fairly bullish about the debt of Spain and Italy. Let me tell you that the only reason why this is happening is because of this. At the beginning of December, the European Central Bank launched a program which is the LTRO, which is basically the offer to banks to buy unlimited quantities of bonds with a maturity up to 3 years. This has created this massive increase in debt. Now, what has happened is that Italy and Spain, in particular Italy, at the beginning of December, just 2 days before this program was launched, passed legislation whereby it guaranteed the government backing, so government guarantee to any kind of bonds produced by Italian banks. So what the Italian banks have been doing until now is issue their own bonds, use this to exchange the bonds with the European Central Bank, so they get money out of it, with whom they buy the Italian debt. This, of course, is a situation which is completely absurd. The Spanish are doing the same thing, because we have banks which have a very, very bad liquidity, guaranteeing for governments which are in debt, and back governments which are in debt, guaranteeing for banks issuing bonds, which of course are not backed by real liquidity. So this is potentially a very explosive situation. If one of the banks or one of these countries is in difficulties, if one of these banks actually goes into default, we may see a domino effect very similar to the one that was prevented after the fall of Lehman Brothers. Now, the Chinese know that, because most people in finance actually know that, and this is one of the reasons why the Chinese are very reluctant to intervene to help the Europeans. And to confirm that, I think we should look at what the Chinese have done so far. They actually bought a very small portion of the Piraeus. Now, the reason why they did it, of course, is because it was convenient for them. So, if we read in between the line of what the leaders of China are saying to the Europeans, is we will intervene when it is convenient for us. China will never do anything that is not for China. This is something that we have to understand. And this is why it will be a completely different leader than has been in the United States and the UK. They're not interested in dominating the world, they're interested in the welfare of China. And so far, I don't think the euro is in the cards for improving the welfare of China. Finally, I want to say something about the historical relationship that there is between the Chinese and the Europeans. The mistrust that there is also related to what in China they call the century of humiliation. after the Opium War, China was colonized by the British and then by the European powers until the Maoist revolution. The country was humiliated by the presence of foreigners. Now this is deeply, deeply rooted in the Chinese collective imagination, so we should not discount that. And finally, one word about Syria, because I'm sure there will be a question about that. Why did the Chinese decided not to back the UN resolution about Syria? Well, the answer is that the Chinese are very concerned about the usage of the resolution, the UN resolution about Libya. That resolution did not contain regime change, but it was used, it was manipulated, that's their view, by the Europeans and the Americans in order to achieve regime change. They do not want to repeat the same experience, and this is the most important reason why they actually have refused to back that resolution. So, what can we learn from China? Well, I think that what we can learn from China is, for sure, flexibility and pragmatism, two qualities that I think we Europeans at the moment are lacking. Now, let me tell you a story just to show you why I think that. In 1980, I went to work in Hungary, went to work at the National Bank of Hungary on a project for the convertibility of the Hungarian forint. I was there working with the governor of the bank, the National Bank of Hungary, but there was also a delegation from the IMF that was working with us. At that time, I learned of the existence of a document which was produced in 1978 by the KGB. Later on, I actually did see this document, whereby it was predicted that communism was going to disappear, to disintegrate within a decade. And the reason why this was going to take place is because communists had failed to create an economy that was sufficiently strong to produce enough growth for the population to prosper. The Hungarian used this document in order to push very, very strongly for a convertibility of the forint, in order to use that as sort of opening up to the West. The Hungarians always had very strong ties with Austria, and so they wanted to use the convertibility of the currency in order to get out of the Soviet bloc. The IMF was enthusiastic, and this is why the delegation was sent there. Now, the Chinese also were perfectly aware that communism was not working. Of course, the difference, and this is very important, between the Chinese and the Soviet, and of course the Eastern European, is that the Chinese were totally isolated, while Western Europe had been maintaining very strong ties in order to lure the Eastern Europe and the Soviet towards our capitalism. China was totally isolated. So there was no way that the Chinese would actually use the help of Western Europe. They had to do something to change their economy in a completely different way. And this explains why the model of development after the beginning of the 1980s started to diverge completely. So the Russians went in one direction, and the Chinese went in a totally different direction. And democracy, of course, came eventually to, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Democracy never came to China, but today China is the largest exporter in the world. It is the fastest growing economy. It is the economic miracle, basically, of globalization. So how did they do that? Well, basically what they did was to adapt communism to the needs of capitalism, because the only way that the economy could grow was to create something totally different, which are defined as capi-communism, which is communism with a profit motive. Now, the men who masterminded this incredible transition was actually Deng Xiaoping. Now, Deng Xiaoping came to power in 1978, and he initiated a program of liberalization right in 1978. Now, it is important to understand the difference, historical background between Mao and Deng. Mao was the only member of the founding committee of the Communist Party in China that never went abroad. He had a completely different vision of China that Deng actually had. Deng studied in France. He worked at the Renault factory. He had a deep understanding of the functioning of Western capitalism, and above all, he was purged during the Cultural Revolution. During those years, he actually studied the capitalist system and came to the conclusion that the only way to save socialism in China was actually to open up to capitalism, so to use the so-called enemy number one of communism in order to save communism. And this is exactly what he did. So when he came to power, he started the process of liberalization in agriculture. So he gave the possibility to farmers actually to sell some of their product privately in order to create a sort of two-tier price market whereby progressively the state control system could become a sort of free market system. Now this unfortunately created some problems, and one of the problems was inflation. Inflation started to pick up from 1979, and this created quite a lot of unrest inside the country. At the same time, this liberalization demanded a progressive dismantling of the welfare state, the communist welfare state that China had, which was basically giving everybody a job, a roof over their heads, and a bowl of rice to eat. So the combination of inflation, prices so rising, and the dismantling of that kind of security that people had during communism created the perfect cocktail for social unrest, which erupted in 1989 in the famous Tiananmen Square demonstration. Now that is a crucial moment in the history of the development of China, because Deng Xiaoping did the unthinkable. The man who initiated this liberalization, the man who wanted to open up China to the world, so to get China out of that communism straitjacket created by Mao, repress with violence and force